Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. And thank you very much for attending our workshop on dynamic segmentation, how to really think about using connected data in a world where data is the new oil to create additional fluency and really understand a new and different way to target groups and understand consumers. What we've got for you this afternoon is YouGov's international data applications team, who will run through the tools that we have at our disposal, but then it's an interactive session. So we will require audience participation. I can see so many of you smiling as a result. But what we will do is I will hand over to our Global Director of Data Applications, Tini Savak, to talk you through how YouGov connects data in a single source network. Tini.
Thanks, Will. So how we think about things. So we recognize the world of research needs to change, right? Things are disparate, they're static, they're siloed. You take more time trying to piece things together, and we've recognized that piece. Further than that is, as a result, there's multiple sources of the truth, right? So if one company is using, or one agency is using one data set, the brand's using another, their purchasing department's using another, everyone has their own version of the truth in this world. And by the time you get that insight, it's already out of date, right? And show of hands, who's had those issues? Okay, excellent. So what we believe in, and this isn't just us, right? So as the hands in the room, is data needs to be outside of the black box and really fueling the decision-making process at agencies, companies, brands, and how do you really link, if you've got a media budget, proving what that media budget did so you can get even more next year. And so being able to have that ability is what we strongly believe in helping our clients, whether they're brands, agencies, media owners, is having that data sets and connecting that to really provide our clients with a solution that is dynamic, that is integrated, and that is innovative. You know, constantly keeping up with the trends of what people are defining as success today is not always different, is not always the same as what we said last year versus 2 years ago or 5 years ago. So really, how do we look at that as a single source connected data solution that goes from an insight to how do you plan against that to how do you measure it? And really that comes down to how do you use data from ways to identify who the right people are, describe them with depth and breadth of our data set. So in the UK alone, we have 200,000 variables that we can describe a person, and that's a lot. And then really to take those and distill it into when and where to meet them with a media plan. How do you execute and buy that audience when it comes to digital or even TV? And then really closing that loop with how do you measure and evaluate that that campaign works? And so we really have built that as an end-to-end story with one single source solution. This isn't going to be your only solution. We would love that. But this is really meant to complement and integrate with your own first-party data or your other solutions that you have. But we try to make this as an easy piece to integrate. And really what we want to make sure is the clients that we have, whether they're agencies or brands, have the knowledge that they have to put those insights into their strategic planning process that make sure that they're, one, consumer-centric. The consumer sits at the heart of everything that brands do, agencies do, and what we do, and really that everything is linked to an outcome. So a brand outcome, integrating with your data sets, it becomes a business outcome, and so on. So what we have inside of our connected solution is, and these are some big numbers, they're worldwide numbers. We can, come visit us at our booth and we'll break them down by each one of the markets because unfortunately, not all markets are created equal, but we have over 5 million people, active panelists within our data set and our data set, over 400,000 data points to describe those people from demographics to lifestyle to attitudes to what I'm going to do in 6 months to what I did last week and things like that. And over 10,000 brands tracked on a daily basis. And we look at 16 metrics from media metrics down to purchasing funnel to brand and buzz perceptions and things like that on a daily basis. And really, You're probably asking, that's a lot of stuff to put into one area, so why have we gone through all of this effort? And the reason why is we want to make sure that our clients are looking at and using that consistent data set in and across markets. So what that allows people to do is share and reapply learnings, what's working, what's not working. It allows you to become a test and learn culture as an agency or a brand. So you can test in one market and apply those learnings in another. So you don't have to test in every single market because that's very expensive. The other piece is the consumer sits at the heart of your strategic planning process. So not just from the who profile, but what's the right platform, what's the right moments that matter to that audience, what messaging is going to resonate with them, so what are those nuances and the taglines that you need to sort of pull out, and then what's the right outcome? How do you prove that you've reached that audience and you move the right metrics that you needed to? And the last is creating that accountability and efficiency of media as a direct driver of brand outcomes. And we know from today, media budgets are being challenged of what is it doing. So moving outside of media metrics in terms of, I got these number of impressions or GRPs, but really moving into brand outcomes and eventually into business outcomes allows you to say, this is why I need that 5 million, 50 million, 5 billion pound budgets as agencies would. So the fun part. So the task, and we have a bit of a challenge to really bring that to life. It's really well me kind of coming up here and going, we've got all this data and look at it and it's fun. So we wanted to sort of do an interactive game. And sort of looking at something that has and is relevant for all of us and has sort of divided us. Relationships have been defined on it, relationships have broken up on it, and that is the iPhone versus Android battle, right? So you've picked and chosen your friends on who you can FaceTime with or who's on Android and things like that. So bringing that to life, and especially with the iPhone release last night, we thought this might be a fun and relevant exercise to sort of go through.
So as Tini has already said, the new iPhone has been launched last night. There are a couple of new features that are coming up, and there are so many new things that people are looking forward to, and you see all those iPhone fans that are really desperate for the new version. But what has changed from the last times to this time is that so the new iPhone X will come at a price point of about $1,000. And the question now is that really something that will be worth people's money for them? Are they really willing to pay that much money for the new features, for the Face ID, or for something that is shinier and nicer and better designed than ever? So we are now having a look at what happened with iPhone launches in the past and how people are perceiving the value of the iPhone in contrast to Samsung, because that is what it boils down to. Are we willing to pay the money for something that we perceive valuable enough? So what we did is have one of our questions of the day. So every day of the week we ask a question to our panels in the UK, the US and Germany. And so last week we asked the people, so with the new iPhone coming up recently, do you actually plan to buy one of those? And you can actually see that there are not that many people anymore who are willing to buy the new iPhone, especially when you look at Germany and the UK. You can see that over 60% say they will definitely not buy the iPhone because they are probably already expecting the higher prices and they have seen other phones coming up that can give them the same benefits. We are also regularly tracking, as we already said, different brands on a daily level, looking at different brand metrics. And you can see here that if you look at the value perception, so the actual value for money that I get from a product, and if you look at the net rep lines in contrast to those who are already owning such a device, then you can see that actually in the US, the perceived value of those phones is the highest for those people who are already owning either an iPhone or a Samsung phone, whereas in the UK, all the lines seem to be pretty tied together. So there's already a big difference between those two markets. And then if you look to the left, you can see in Germany, it's kind of in the middle. You can see that the iPhone value for money is perceived to be quite low. People are not really willing to pay that much money, even those people who are already owning one. So what we are going to look into now is what's the difference between those markets and how can I then come up with the perfect launch strategy if I would want to launch the new iPhone. So having a look at just demographics, as you can see here, we've done for the German market looking at current customers of the iPhone and the Samsung. You can see there's actually no big difference. They tend to be rather female, rather older than 55, and the only thing that seems to slightly differentiate those two groups of people is the income. So demographics is definitely not enough here. Also looking at the US, it's the same thing. The Samsung consumers are slightly younger, but then again, the income seems to be the one thing that seems to differentiate them, but that's not really helping when you want to come up with a proper launch strategy. So what we now want to do is show you the power of our data when you add more than just demographics, adding attitudes, adding lifestyle, adding brand usage and perception of other brands, and then also adding in your media behavior in order to find out how can I target those people. And then we have already created such a grid in order to look at different groups of people. And for today, we want to focus on the fans of both the iPhone and the Samsung devices. And we defined the fans as really the hardcore fans, those people who are either currently already a customer, who are considering the brand. They also have a positive impression, and they would even recommend the brand to someone else. So now I'm handing over to Will, who will then guide you through the exercise.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, we were going to plan to break you into groups, but given we've got a full house, I think we're going to have to do this via sort of hands up, sit down, stand up, move around, and a bit of a panel discussion at the front here. So as we see, what we've conceived from the data is using traditional targeting techniques. You can't actually separate an iPhone versus an Android person. You look at demographics, you look at income, but what we've got leaning on the vast data set that we've got is that ability to really describe a group in unenviable detail. So what we've done is we've prepared a set of cards that I'd like to run through, and we're going to give you some options. We're going to give you two options, and what I want you to do is try and separate these in terms of their association with either an Android fan or an iOS fan, or an Apple fan. What we'll then do is we'll open it up to discussion amongst the panel here to really try and tease out what they think are the right answers. Now what we've done is we've deliberately jumbled these cards, so nobody on this panel has any idea about what the right answer is, but we can certainly reveal that to you and discuss it with you in detail at our booth and at a wrap-up. Okay. So, we're dealing with a UK data set. So put yourself in the mind of a UK consumer if you can, and think Apple or Android. And so these are the fans that have an over-index or a close association with this brand. So if we start with Netflix, hands up if you think that is more closely associated with Apple fans. Interesting. Hands down, hands up if you think it's more closely associated with Android. Ooh. I'd say that's probably a slightly in favor of Apple. Team, over to you. What do you think? Mark.
Okay, I reckon that Netflix is more Apple and that the equivalent for Samsung or Android would be Amazon Prime. on the basis that I think maybe Netflix is slightly more mainstream, and that would be my logic behind it.
Interesting. So it's more of a sort of a value play in that instance?
Quite possibly.
Okay. Any other opposing views? No? Okay. We'll go on to the next brand, Foster's. Foster's Lager. Hands up if you think that's more closely associated with Apple fans. Oh, a few takers down the front. Why, madam? Why do you think that is more likely to be an Apple fan? No idea. It's just a 50-50 guess. More chilled. I like that. Hands up if you think that's more closely associated with Android fans. Oh, and lots of indecision. Who had their hand up for Android? You, sir. Why do you think that Foster's is more closely associated with Android? Down to earth. I'm sort of getting a sort of a sense of Android users, more of a value play, more down to earth. Those of us that own iPhones and are buying the next one have got their heads in the cloud, less rational, more emotional. Is that just me? Okay.
So what handset do you have?
I would go with Android on that one. Let's move on. Oh, this is an interesting one. Airbnb. Who thinks that's more closely associated with Apple? And Android? Oh, about a 50-50 split. Team, that's over to you to discuss. Teeny, where do you think that's going to sit?
I would say Airbnb is probably Apple. Only
Okay.
because it's something that's trendy, it's something that's innovative, it's something that's a bit off. It sort of distinguishes you from just staying at a blanketed hotel.
Interesting. Mark, you looks like you.
So I think Airbnb would be Samsung or Android because essentially it's about choice. And it's about having a variety of different things to choose from, which obviously with Apple you can't so much. I hope I'm not offending anyone in the room.
Interesting. All right, here we go. Right, enough of brands. We'll move on to personality traits. So these are things that YouGov asks its panel, and we ask people to rate themselves on their own personality traits and describe themselves. So the first personality trait is trustworthy and easygoing. Hands up if you think those are more closely associated with Apple and Android. Oh my God. Right. Those of us with Apple are untrustworthy and high maintenance by the sounds of it. Team, where are you going on that one? Trustworthy and easygoing.
I would go Android. Being a user of both, it's again the value perception, also how you see yourself. The more earthy, down-to-earth Foster's drinker. But yeah, I go Samsung and Android on that.
Okay. If we move on to interests. So again, we have endless demographics associated with people's hobbies and behaviors, and also, of course, their interests. So let's start with an easy one, I think. Music. Hands up who thinks that's more closely associated with Apple. Oh my God, right, so okay, so we're more or less full there. And Android? None. Really? No Android people like me? Okay, madam, I'm going to come and pick on you. Why do you think that, in fact, let me get a microphone here. This might be much easier. Why do you think that Android might be interested in music?
I would actually say that it's Android or Samsung or whatever because it's actually easier for a user to access the music and to have the variety in it rather than having installed iTunes and learn how to actually download or how to actually, store and pay for a lot of it and so on. It's more commercialized and more closed for that matter.
Interesting. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Okay, moving on from music. People and celebrities. Who think that Apple fans are more into their gossip, people and celebrities? Hands up. Interesting. And what about Android? Okay, people sitting on the fence. I think this is going to have to go to the adjudication. So, people and celebrities, team. Where does that sit?
I would actually also go for Apple because, I mean, that's the people that are interested in the latest trends, and they would probably also want to know what kind of devices their favorite celebrities are using. So they should be interested in that if they want to know.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I would say Apple on the basis that it's probably slightly more sort of fashionable. So, you know, again, it keeps up with the latest style trends, fashion trends, that type of thing.
Okay, interesting. We'll move on to life events. So again, within our extensive data set, we ask people what life events they have been through in the last 12 months and what life events they're going to go through in the next 12 months. Incredibly important data for advertisers, really picking up on those key moments in a consumer journey when people are open to new ideas, open to new services. Let's start with, a rather nice one. The birth of a grandchild. This is the level of detail that we can go down to within our data. Who reckons that that's more closely associated with Apple fans over the next 12 months in the UK? And Android? See, I mean, there's no way to tell, is there? That is just the beauty of holding that data. Okay, who thinks that, what about graduate from university? Who thinks that's more closely associated with Apple and Android? Yeah, see, I would have gone Android on that one on the basis it's a value play and students can't afford Apple. Any opposing views to that?
I, as usual, disagree. I think although, you know, yes, they won't have the money, but I also think they'll also fork over because they don't see the value of what a pound and everything is. So they will want to buy the Apple, so to keep up with their friends, to show where they are and things like that. So I think graduating from university will be an Apple person.
Interesting.
Yeah, I also think that value is quite an interesting thing to talk about anyway, because there's a bit of a trade-off between, for consumers, between Apple and Android products. I think in the sense that although there's a lower price point, I think there's a perception of the longer-term value of an Apple product in terms of how long the battery life might be or how long that product might last. So I think that might come into play in terms of the value proposition for students.
Interesting. Interesting. Right. Went to work yesterday. Who thinks that that's more closely associated with Apple fans? No, they're all layabouts like me. This is really hard work. This is more play. What about Android? No, you can't separate the two. That's really interesting. We'll come back to that one towards the end. What we also have is data around people's attitude towards different things, be that love, life, technology, etc. So we asked people to agree to these various attitude statements. We've got about 450 of them across our data set. So I'm always keen to use new technology products as soon as they enter the market. Where do we think that one sits, team?
I think that's definitely Apple. I think the long queues, if that is a sign for anything, I would say they are the ones that as soon as a new Apple product comes out, they're the ones that are first in line and will wait days in line.
Have you ever waited days in line yourself?
Nope.
Will you ever?
I also might be an Android.
Oh dear. You and I can't be friends. I'm untrustworthy, and you
I'm
are.
easygoing, so it's fine.
What about in terms of media reach? So, We ask people about their media consumption habits, everything from above-the-line TV, magazine readership, radio stations that they listen to. We also ask them which advertising channels really grab their attention and make them sit up and pay notice. So, in top order, in rank order, if I say online adverts, TV adverts, and radio, who thinks that those are the top 3 channels for Apple fans? What about the top 3 channels for Android fans? No? Can't split them. That's really interesting. Any thoughts on that?
So I would probably go for the Android fan here, because online, yes, that's maybe something I would have associated with Apple, but being still reachable via such traditional media such as TV and radio, that's something I would assume more with the mature Android user.
Okay. Really? You again. All right, I think what we'll do is we'll leave it there for the game, but I think what that's really proven is some things you just can't use to separate different groups of people, be it traditional targeting techniques, but if you delve into the depth of data to really understand those groups, you can start pulling them apart on things that you wouldn't otherwise think of in order to use as targeting tools. What I'll do is I'll hand over to Mark to just wrap this up and bring it home. Mark.
Thanks, Will. So hopefully you found that a useful tool. Next one. There we go. Yeah, hopefully you found that a useful task. We just wanted to wrap this up by just talking about this plan and track solution, which Tini sort of started talking about, but essentially how we just shown a small element of a small kind of scratch of the surface of some of the data that's available in our tools. But ultimately, all of this data that's there can be used to close the loop from planning through to tracking, and with activation in the middle. So plan and track is what we call this connected data solution that we have, which allows you to be able to identify an audience initially, to profile them, describe them at great depth against several hundred thousand data points, and then to be able to target them using some of the media variables that Will described there to understand when and where to best target to them. We also have tools available that allow us to be able to then measure and track and evaluate the success of campaigns. And I'll describe those more in a moment. So actually, this was just taking some of the results, some of the actual results. This is how you would begin to pull apart those different audiences that we were describing then. So as you can see, we've broken the data out into Germany, UK, and US. So a German iPhone fan over-indexes significantly for considering Deutsche Telekom as a brand. They're also interested in finance and economics, and they're much more likely to go to the opera, apparently. Whereas German Samsung fans are much more likely to be interested in beauty, to consider themselves curious and a team player, and they're also much more likely to go to the cinema. So perhaps actually you can start to see there how you might be able to use that for targeting purposes around cinema advertising for Samsung. In the UK, iPhone fans are much more likely to pay attention to online ads, to watch reality shows, and to keep up to date with current fashion trends. So I think I was right when I said that Apple fans are perhaps more into the latest fashion trends and celebrities. Samsung fans, on the other hand, are more interested in video games. They also watch sports on TV, and they say that they rely on TV to keep them informed. And then finally, in the US, we have iPhone fans are more likely to have recently started a new job and to go to the gym and consider themselves bubbly and funny. And that's the type of information that you can use really to start tailoring advertising, messaging, and make sure that it's speaking to them in the correct kind of voice. And US Samsung fans are more likely to go to theme parks, And they say that posters and billboards, so outdoor advertising, helps them to become aware of new products and services. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavor of actually how you would start to get to grips with all of this data and go far beyond just standard demographic targeting. So just to summarize, the other thing that we wanted to mention was that we've primarily been talking today about our flagship connected data products, which are Profiles and Brand Index. But we also have solutions that are available to clients that go beyond the login, namely dynamic segmentation, activate, and marketing campaign effectiveness. So the first of those, dynamic segmentation, allows you essentially to be able to onboard either an existing or a brand new segmentation so that you can look at all of your individual audience segments to identify, describe, and target them. Secondly, because of a number of relationships that we have or integrations that we have with DMPs and data houses, we are also able to then take those audiences and activate them in a programmatic space. And the final step of that, which kind of closes the loop, is that we can use things like pixel tracking in the online world, or we can use traditional surveys in the offline world to be able to track key measures over time. And also using our brand index tool, we can write exposure back into those tools and see various different brand health measures, how they're moving over time. So, we hope you found this really useful today. Please come and visit our booth, which is at A051 in Hall 7. And if you've got any questions, then please do ask.
Okay. Question-wise, we've got one over the back here, sir. Yep. Coming on our way. If you could have your name and where you're from as well.
Yeah, Donald from the Netherlands. How do you avoid spurious correlations? Because you can make very interesting combinations which are correlated but insignificant.
How do we avoid spurious correlations, team?
Across metrics.
Yep.
So the big piece is a lot of our data is collected daily. So we have the sample size to be able to look at robustness in terms of sample size when we do the relationships between different metrics. A lot of this is more of a direct link. So really, if we're linking that ad exposure to a change in brand perception, it's not correlating that relationship, but really measuring me as a panelist, I was exposed to an ad, and then what was my corresponding change in brand perception.
Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Aaron and I'm from Germany. My question is, let's suppose I'm Samsung and I want to target the hardcore Apple fans. With this knowledge, do you think I could actually convince hardcore Apple fans by addressing them in the correct way to buy a Samsung next time?
I might not be the best person to answer because I'll always buy Samsung over Apple. But yes, I think the big piece in this is in that grid that we showed up in there is you could create that grid if you're Apple to know who your fans are, and if you're Apple, how to execute against that. But also if you're Samsung and you want to know who the current customers of your competitors are, what's important to them to see how do you tease that out to run almost a cross campaign, you could do that. And that's the beauty of a lot of the data that sits in our database is we look at fans of a lot of those industries across. So if you're in automotive, or if you're in telecom or anything, it's understanding not only who your customers are, but who your potentially leaky bucket is and might go over to another brand or another competitor.
Mark.
Yeah, the other thing I would add to this is that obviously with this kind of matrix that we have up here, it's very easy to kind of create one for Apple, one for Samsung, or for HTC or anyone else who operates in that category. But because of the nature of our data over time, we can also start to kind of dip in at various different points in time to see how that's changed, where are particular boxes up here beginning to grow or shrink, and as well as being able to kind of overlay all the profiling data that we talked about earlier. So is the audience aging? Is it becoming more wealthy or whatever it is?
Excellent. Any further question. Yes, madam. Oh, you're making it difficult for me. Here we go. I feel like Annika Rice.
Yeah, one question about the behaviors and preferences that you're able to track, because you could basically ask questions in all different areas. So how do you prioritize and how do you decide which questions to ask those interview pools? Is it based on initial hypothesis, or how do you prioritize there?
So I don't think, so we won't necessarily, so this is not a dip-in survey that will go, okay, we're going to run a campaign for Apple and we want to ask these specific questions. There's a set of, in our code book, that we ask always on, and then it's looking at how each one of those questions necessarily differ for if you're doing a current customer of Apple versus net rep, and being able to tease those out. But what we don't do is to say there's specific questions and we'll prioritize what we want to look at. What we can do is, if your Apple's a brand or their agency, is do a recontact. So we could dive into certain elements, so a consumer group or an audience group, and we contact with specific questions that we want to know. But in terms of our code book and what we look at, it's always on and stuff. What we try to do with that is make sure that that is as up to date. So every month we add in 1,000 more variables to make sure that we're asking the most relevant questions that will matter to our clients and audiences.
I think it's
Brilliant.
especially the fact that we are continuously tracking the data makes it so valuable again, because we can go back in time, as Mark already said, and we are just making sure that the data that we continuously measure is relevant for everyone and that we keep up with latest trends, and that's doable with the way we track data. And then when a client wants to have a really specific and information, we can also add that, and that's the beauty of this connected data as we provide it.
Brilliant. Any other? Yes, sir.
So people don't always do what they say they're going to do, and obviously people aren't necessarily that accurate in evaluating themselves. So I'm just wondering if that's something you guys take into account with your data. Do you have like metadata? So do you look at like percentage of people who say that they are like this or in fact not like this? Are there any kind of like negative correlations that you look out for?
I think you do the general public a disservice. I think they absolutely know their minds. No, I think you're right. And one of the things that we do, as well as having kind of opinion data, so survey data, we also have a passively tracked panel where we are monitoring people's website and app usage. So that's one of the areas in which we can actually kind of use that to check whether the responses that we get through surveys of people actually doing certain things, we can verify that they're actually doing that in the real world. That's one way that we can do it.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, a lot of what we have with our panels and the incentives is we incentivize them to almost tell the truth in terms of their behaviors and their uniqueness, and being able to see where they come back with, by telling the truth, what their opinions are on certain topics. They get to see what that comes back with. As you can imagine, yes, one of the big pieces is how many times do you check Facebook, right? I'm going to say I check it 5 times a day, and I'm going to say that's a truth.
Liar.
I was getting there. If you know me, yes, I'm on it all the time. So there's certain elements we know that we want to actually get actual behavior on, but when it comes to people's opinions, their thoughts, you tell the truth on that piece. And a lot of the stuff in terms of what's important of I trust online advertising, or how you feel about mobile payment and things like that, that's where we do put the trust back into the public to give us that accuracy. But yes, your Facebook habits, certain sites that you go on, those are things that we also try to balance claim behavior versus actual, which allows us to also predict the next consumer trend as well.
I think also the fact that we have such a huge variety of data that does not only benefit you when you are using the data in the end, but it's also good for our panelists because they know they do short surveys on different topics and it's not boring, so they really want to interact with us, but also with each other. And we have very, very good ways to make this as interactive as possible for our panelists.
Brilliant, thank you very much. I think we've got time for one more question if there is one out there. No? Okay. Well, Tini, Dirte, Mark, thank you very much. That was really interesting. I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.